Canada stands at a crossroads in its trade relationship with China. Over the last few years, tensions have grown between Ottawa and Beijing. Much of this friction centers around tariffs, especially those on electric vehicles and agricultural goods. The result is an uncertain landscape for many Canadian businesses. At the heart of these disputes lies a web of political, economic, and social pressures. China is one of Canada's top trading partners. However, a series of diplomatic incidents and trade restrictions have soured relations. Tariffs have become the tools both countries use to protect their interests and signal displeasure. For Canadians, these tariffs are not just numbers on a spreadsheet. They are real. They affect everything from the price of cars in Toronto to the profits of wheat farmers in Saskatchewan. Every day, businesses and workers feel the ripple effects of these policies in their pockets and lives. So, how did Canada go from open trade to tough tariffs? And what does this mean for the future? To answer these questions, we must look closely at the recent 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles and the storm that followed. The decision to impose a 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles did not come out of the blue. Ottawa cited two main reasons. First, there was concern about cheap Chinese imports flooding the Canadian market. These electric vehicles, often subsidized by the Chinese government, threatened to undercut domestic car makers. Second, the move was a response to signals from south of the border. The United States, under President Trump, slapped hefty tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, citing national security. Canada, heavily linked to the U.S. auto industry, felt pressure to act in step to avoid becoming a backdoor for Chinese cars into North America. Farmers, however, saw trouble ahead. China quickly retaliated with tariffs of its own, targeting Canadian agricultural exports. Wheat, canola, and pork producers became the unwilling victims of a trade war they didn't start. The government claimed the move would protect Canadian jobs. But protectionism often has unintended consequences. As Chinese electric vehicle imports stalled at the border, farmers watched their sales to China fall sharply, feeling the pain of Ottawa's tough stance. Prairie farmers have long relied on China as a major buyer. When Ottawa imposed its 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, the backlash was swift. China's response was to slap tariffs on Canadian farm exports. Wheat, barley, and pork were hit hardest. This hit farm incomes immediately. According to the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, exports to China dropped by nearly 30% in just 6 months. For many family farms, this meant tough choices. Some cut back on workers, others delayed equipment upgrades, all felt the squeeze. What made things worse was timing. Prices for farm goods were already under pressure globally. New tariffs only deepened the challenge. Farmers who had nothing to do with electric cars felt caught in the crossfire of Ottawa's trade policy. Many asked whether the government had weighed the costs to agriculture before acting. Their frustration was clear. Why should farmers pay the price for disputes over cars? The debate over tariffs had now become a national conversation about fairness and priorities. Initially, Ottawa defended its tough approach. The government argued that strong action was needed to protect Canadian industry. Ministers spoke of the need to stand up to unfair competition from China. But as farm groups and automakers voiced concerns, the tone began to shift. Within months, small signs of change emerged. Ottawa opened quiet talks with Chinese officials. Behind closed doors, Canadian negotiators explored compromises, aiming to reduce tensions and restore lost agricultural sales. This new approach reflected political reality. The farm backlash had become a headache for the ruling party, especially in rural ridings. Polls showed falling support among key voters. The government realized it needed to balance protection for the auto sector with relief for farmers. Ottawa's pivot did not mean surrender. Instead, it signaled a willingness to fine-tune policy and seek middle ground. The hope was to build a more stable, flexible trade relationship that could survive both storms and sunny days. The impact of tariffs has been, well, pretty profound on both electric vehicle sales and agriculture. In the auto sector, Canadian car makers enjoyed a brief reprieve from Chinese competition. Local EV sales rose slightly as buyers turned to domestic and U.S. brands. However, prices also went up as supply shrank and choices narrowed. For agriculture, though, the story was different. Exports to China plummeted as tariffs made Canadian crops more expensive. The Canadian Grain Commission reported a 25% drop in wheat shipments to China compared to the previous year. Farmers scrambled to find new buyers in Europe and Asia, but these markets just couldn't fully replace lost Chinese demand. Consumers also felt the changes. With fewer cheap EVs available, some Canadians delayed switching from gas to electric cars. Climate goals suffered a setback. Meanwhile, rural communities saw fewer jobs and less investment as farm incomes fell. The lesson? Tariffs rarely hit just one target. They send shockwaves through the entire economy, reshaping choices for businesses, workers, and families alike. The economic fallout from Canada's tariffs is still unfolding. Early data paint a mixed picture. The auto sector gained some breathing room, but at a price. Statistics Canada reports that electric vehicle prices climbed an average of 8% after the tariffs, with imports from China dropping by about 2/3. For farmers, the numbers are, well, harsher. Farm Credit Canada estimates that total agricultural exports to China fell by more than $1.1 billion in the first year after the tariffs. Rural unemployment ticked up in some provinces. Equipment sales and farm investments slowed. GDP growth took a minor hit. Analysts calculate that the tariffs may have shaved 0.2% off Canada's GDP in the last fiscal year. This may sound small, but for an economy already facing headwinds, every fraction matters. The broader lesson is that tariffs rarely offer free protection. They come with real costs, some obvious and others hidden. Policymakers must weigh these costs carefully when shaping the country's future trade path. What can Canada do to escape this trade trap? Several options are on the table. First, Ottawa could negotiate a deal with China to phase out some tariffs. This would likely help farmers but might leave the auto sector exposed to cheaper electric vehicle imports. Another idea is to boost support for affected sectors. For example, direct subsidies or tax breaks could help both farmers and car makers weather the storm. However, such measures are expensive and may spark further tensions with trading partners. Some experts urge a broader diversification of markets. By building deeper ties with Europe, Southeast Asia, and Latin America, Canada could reduce its reliance on China. This would take time and investment, but honestly, might offer the best long-term security. Each solution has trade-offs. None promise a quick fix. The challenge for Canada is to choose wisely, balancing the needs of both its farmers and its factories. Canada's future prosperity depends on smart trade policy. The country cannot afford to ignore the needs of either the auto sector or agriculture. Both are pillars of the economy. Both face global competition and changing technology. A rigid one-size-fits-all approach to tariffs is unlikely to succeed. Instead, Canada must stay nimble, adjusting its strategy as new challenges and opportunities arise. This means listening to the voices of farmers, car makers, and consumers alike. It also means working closely with allies. As global trade shifts, the value of partnerships grows. Canada must engage not only with the United States and China but also with Europe, Asia, and Latin America. Strong ties everywhere mean less risk anywhere. Above all, Canada needs a strategy that delivers for the many, not just the few. Fairness, flexibility, and foresight will be the keys to navigating the next chapter in global trade. Imagine a future where Canada lifts its tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. Would farmers regain lost markets? Would domestic car makers survive the competition? Or, what if Ottawa doubles down on protectionism? What might that mean for jobs and climate goals? These are not easy questions. Each path holds risks and rewards. Policymakers will need to make tough calls, often with imperfect information. The choices made today will shape the economy for years. What do you think? Should Canada open its borders to more competition, or keep shielding key industries? How much should one sector sacrifice for another? Are there creative solutions that could serve both? Canada's trade story is still being written. Its outcome will depend on the wisdom, courage, and flexibility of its leaders, and on the voices of ordinary Canadians, who have the most to gain or lose in the world of tomorrow.